So here, let me give you the four categories that I kind of learned about. The first is personal experience. We covered all of them, or direct observation, right? If someone says, hey, if I say it's sunny today, and someone asks, how do you know that's true? I'll say, well, I walked outside and I saw that it was sunny, right? So like a lot, and I think that's a pretty big source of truth, your experience, you being able to personally see, touch, or experience something around your environment. Pretty hard to debunk also. The second source is testimony of others, right? George Washington was the first president. How do you know that's true? Well, historians told me so. There's monuments, there's literature, there's art about it. The testimony of others. I think for me, how I became a Christian is that my mom told me about God, right? And she had she was a pretty large authority figure in my life. She answered all my other questions. So she told me about Jesus, and I believed her. So testimony of others, I think there's a lot of things that we know only through what we've heard and seen. There's so many things that we don't have the personal experience of. If you look at the news, almost none of these things that you believe is now true did you actually experience. It was told to you, right? I love CNN, Fox News, I'll watch once in a while. I don't believe them necessarily, or, the other liberal channel. But, CNN, I kind of believe them. So when they're reporting on a story, they try to also take you into the eyewitness account, right? They have camera crews and whatnot. But oftentimes it's just a testimony. And then thirdly, logic. I would say it's not raining at Biola right now. Someone would say, how do you know that's true? And I would premise 1, sun's out and there are no clouds. Premise 2, there needs to be clouds for it to rain. Therefore, it's not raining at Biola right now, right? So that's like a logical statement. I think science is interesting because maybe it's a combination between observation and logic. Usually observation of an expert, their testimony, and also their logical conclusion. So I would say science is actually a tier up, and these three are kind of fundamental. Okay, so my second question, what are biblical examples? So did you guys get the three categories? Personal experience, testimony of others, and logic. What are biblical examples of God communicating truth through these categories? So I want you guys to go in your little circles again. In each of these categories, can you think of a biblical example of God communicating truth, communicating who he is or who Jesus is through these different categories? So the first one, in terms of personal experience, I think about all the miracles Jesus did, right? In revealing that he was the Christ, he was the Messiah, whether it's healing the lame, the blind, the mute, right, the paralyzed. Not only were they experiencing the power of God, it's hard to deny that someone's God when you experience that, but also when you see it happen. A lot of his miracles was in front of crowds, and they saw that. They were amazed by his power, right? So there's a lot of personal experience that happens in connection with God revealing truth. Again, a lot of Old Testament stories too. Testimony of others, we have the Samaritan woman. She goes back into town, right? She tells the whole town, I met the Messiah. And through her testimony, this whole town comes to Jesus. But it wasn't only her testimony. After she met Jesus, they said, hey, before we believed through your testimony, now we believe because we've met him. If you think about most of the Bible, we're reading the testimony of other people, Luke, John, Mark, Matthew, Moses writes, right? So all of those, the way we engage Scripture is we're reading the testimony of others. Logic was interesting. I think the one I thought about logic was when Jesus told the man on the mat who was lowered by his friends, right? He said, what is easier, to forgive someone's sins or to say, pick up your mat and walk? And this was actually a logical argument because, as you know, neither is possible without him being a divine person, right? So what does he do? He forgives him of his sin. Then there's doubt among the Pharisees. He makes this quote, and then he asks him to pick up his mat and walk. And so he's making this logical inference that I have to be God, or else this person cannot walk. Therefore, I can forgive sin. I am God, right? That's his pretty much his logical statement. I think also another logical statement was Jesus raising from the dead. Peter in Acts chapter 2 says, okay, so Jesus rose from the dead. You guys are all witnesses of this. If a man dies, he stays dead. Therefore, he's not a man. I don't know. Is that a good logical proof for you guys? So in all these ways, I think the coolest thing is that God is true in whatever avenue we search for him in. And people have different values for truth. Does that make sense? Some people they value personal experience. They uplift that. And all the other truth avenues may be diminished, or even they don't even make sense to them. And other people might uplift logic, or other people might uplift the personal testimony of specific people. And so I think apologetics goes beyond science and logic into really understanding what does this person value in terms of truth, right? Not that truth is relative, but how a person comes to truth is relative. Some people have a high value for some things and a low value for others. So when I approach someone, I do this, I don't just like, bam, 4 spiritual laws, right? Eventually I do, but I do an assessment, and there's a lot of things that I assess, but one of the things I'm trying to understand is what does this person value in terms of his or her sense of truth? What gets to him or her? You know, is he a feeler? Is everything he knows about life through his feeling, through his observation? If it is, and I sit down with him, I spend an hour trying to get him to understand the ontological argument, right? And he gets it. Even if he says, yeah, this sounds true to me, it wouldn't matter to him. It would just roll off, you know, his shoulder. But if I appeal to him in a way that makes sense, in a way that is valued in his truth, then sometimes it just clicks and they get it. So let me ask you this last question. In our modern context, how does God communicate truth in those categories? How could God use you, or how could God communicate truth to these people that he wants to reach? You know, there's the inspired word of God, but what are other ways that we can share about Christ, or what are other ways that people can know who he is in these different categories? You know, I think that personal experience has become, if we look at postmodern culture, it's like super elevated as a culture, right? You know, the statements of it's true for me might not be true for you, or I think, like I was watching The Voice, I really like that show, and the judges will say, for me, the winner of this battle is, and once he says for me, everyone's like, you know, no one's gonna boo that because it's for him, you know? He's not speaking for everyone. And I think we have a cultural acceptance of personal experience that becomes like almost the apex of truth in my interactions with people. And so how do people experience God? Here are some of the things that I thought of. I think that a lot of people I know have come to God through worship, like a worship experience that was very emotional and whatnot, you know, and like they're there, they've kind of visited a church, or they somehow come into a community, and there's a spiritual experience. In a lot of times worship really connects someone's soul and emotions. There could be a spiritual experience where they're like, hey, there's some tingles here, you know, what is that, right? I feel a sense of peace, what is that? And I think that sometimes can be undervalued. We can just kind of put that aside. But if it's a genuine move of the Spirit and he's reaching them, then I feel like that's a personal experience that someone can hold on to and then hear the gospel and then root themselves in truth. Does that make sense? So I think the vibrance of worship. I think another way that people experience God is an answered prayer. So I remember one of the people that I was evangelizing to, he told me, hey, like, I told him I was a pastor, and he's like, I owe God like 7 trips to church. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I was driving to Vegas, and there was all this traffic, and I said, dear God, if traffic disappears in 3 minutes, I will go to church 3 times, right? And bam, there was no more traffic, and then he got to Vegas unhindered, right? And then he went to South America during rain season, and he's like, and it rains forever, and he's like, if it doesn't rain while I'm there, I'll go to church 4 times, right? And it didn't rain. And he was like shocked, and he was like telling me about this. And you know, I think one approach would be, okay, God's not a genie and rebuke him, right? But another thing, right, and it's true, and we shouldn't pray like that because we should know better. But I also feel like maybe God met him in an experience, in the place that he was at. When I see prayers answered, I see the most ridiculous prayers answered when they're prayed by non-believers. just as a validation that God is real. And I think he's almost scandalous about it. One of my other friends, he was like coming to faith, and he said, yeah, I prayed that I would find like this jacket on sale. And I walked into the mall, and that exact jacket was 50% off, you know? And that was like an experience of God. I remember I walked into the mall, I prayed the same thing, and God's like, aren't we past this? You know, like, come on. I remember this other time, I was at the basketball court. I had been evangelizing to one of the guys there, and he wasn't that interested in God. But we kept playing basketball together. I kept inviting him out. And then one day he hurt his ankle real bad, and it just started swelling. Like, you watch it swell. It was phenomenal, right? My finger would go deeper and deeper into his ankle. And so it was so fun. And then at one point, I was like, oh, shit, I should pray for him, right? So I was like, hey, let me pray for you. And I prayed, and it wasn't the most faith-filled prayer. You know, I just prayed. And then, like, his ankle didn't de-swell, and I was kind of sad about it. And I remember, even as I was praying, he was like, man, if God answers my prayer, I'll go to your church, whatever, right? I was like, awesome. And so I prayed for him. And nothing happened. And then that Sunday, I came to pick up his friend, and he showed up. I was like, dude, hey, man, I'm so glad you could come to church with me. He's like, yeah, my ankle healed, like, a lot faster than I expected, you know? I think some of the most miraculous things happen when we're praying for people who are open to God but don't know him yet. And I really hope that also in our lives that we would experience God, you know, that that would be a source of truth for us. It might be our highest, it might be our lowest, but that would be a part of how we know God. In terms of testimony of others, you know, I think that before people receive others' testimony when they have a position or authority, right? Like, oh, I'm a teacher, I'm a scholar. But I feel like in our postmodern world, that's breaking down a lot also. And I heard some conversation over here that it's a lot more about relationships. So when I'm sharing my testimony to someone, I'm thinking about what kind of relationship I have with them. You know, I think that so many people, they just kind of jump into someone's spiritual life without really knowing them, without hearing their personal story, without even thinking, like, was I mean to them this week? You know, and now I'm trying to share Christ. Do they think I'm a jerk? Yeah, right? So they think I'm a jerk, and I'm trying to share Christ with them. That's a bad relationship. But I look for times where I can share Christ because the truth from testimony is attached to whose testimony it's from. Does that make sense? So some people will say this is true because of this person, right? Because my mom told me God's real, I was like, okay, right? But if some other preschooler told me God's real, I'd have my doubts because he also told me to eat my boogers the other day, right? So, and that wasn't right. Okay, so what is the type of relationship that we have with this person? I look for times where I have influence over people. And with guys, it's not that hard. If you're good at something and you dominate other guys in that little sphere, right? You can speak into their life and they'll listen to you. It's really amazing. Like, I'm pretty good at shooting pool. So I'll go shoot pool with non-believers and I'll just destroy them. Like, they won't get a shot in, right? But after that, they're like, tell me about life, Wilson. Tell me about eternity. Maybe not in those words, but they're open to it, right? I'm also pretty good at basketball, so I'll go dominate people in basketball. And the whole time, you know, I'll block someone, I'll rip the ball from someone, you know, I'll hit a shot in their face. But I'm not talking trash. When they make a shot, I'm really encouraging, you know, like building that rapport, right? And then I can share the gospel with them because I have that type of influence. Lastly, I remember this guy, he came over to our small group because he wanted to play Street Fighter, and it was fun and all that. And then he started sharing about his mom passing away and then how he was grieving over that. And all the communities he was in just gave him very superficial answers or really didn't know how to engage with his loss. But I was able to sit with him and let him cry, let him share, be a comforting to him. And now in my mind, I know, okay, in my relationship with him, I'm not just an acquaintance or a stranger anymore. I'm a close friend. Even though we've not met many times, I know he hasn't been able to share that with a lot of people who's really been present with him. And so at that point, I said, hey, let me, you know, I can't be here for you all the time. I want to be like, give me a call, let's meet up for coffee. That's what I said at first. And I said, but I really feel like God can be there for you all the time, you know? And I shared the gospel with him. So when we think about sharing our testimony with others, it really only counts if we have a place of influence in their life. Does that make sense? So we need to build rapport with them. The last thing is logic. How do we share with someone who has logical questions? And I think that this is where apologetics really builds that for you guys. You could remove a lot of the stumbling blocks that they're struggling with through logical arguments, through science, through your, whatever you're studying here, through our DVD talks. So I think that that's a really important step, because my other apologetics professor, he said that most people don't come to Christ because you gave them a great argument, about God. But it can remove obstacles. It can remove the reasons why they don't believe. And then you can open up the gospel for them. But at the same time, I hope that we would see the power of personal experience and testimony also. And we would believe that when we're praying with someone who doesn't know God, that, man, if God's real, I'm going to pray that right now they can experience him in a tangible way. Right now I pray that they would know that God's real. I don't know. God can do something, right? He's living. He cares for this person. All I have is maybe a couple prayers with this person. And then also I challenge non-believers to challenge God. Okay, so one of my friends, I met at a mission trip. She's in Vietnam, and we've been keeping good communication. And she's messaging me, and I'm encouraging her to go to church, and I have connections there, encouraging her to meet up with other Christians. And she kind of stops me and she says, I'm a Buddhist. I've been raised Buddhist. I really can't become a Christian. I was like, oh, that's cool. So I saw wall, hitting wall, not good. And then the conversation shifts and she says, I'm not sleeping really well. I've been really anxious about school, and every night I can't sleep. And this is what I say to her. I say, what I want you to do? I want you to pray to Buddha and ask him to help you sleep better. But then after you pray to Buddha, and if it doesn't work, I want you to pray to Jesus. And I want you to see if there's a difference when you pray to Jesus. And I believe that God could, maybe will, move powerfully in her life. I challenge people like that because, hey, I'm just a messenger. This guy, he's the real deal. He loves them more than I do, way more powerful. And I'll have them put God to the test to see if he's real or not. And let me tell you that I've not been disappointed. God works with me. Sorry, I work with God. Something like that, for God. When I approach someone with the gospel, I see them as like a fortified city, right? And I'm looking for entry points. Maybe they're hardcore like I hate the church. So I'm not going to talk about the church community. Maybe they're hardcore like, I've been atheist my whole life. This is 105 reasons why God doesn't exist. Maybe I won't go that direction. Maybe I'll make some progress, but I'll pull back. But I'm looking for, what are the big questions they're asking? And how can I answer them? How can God answer them? One time I was in the counselor's office in high school. This guy who is very worldly, did all these things, but the day before he got in a car accident and the car flipped 3 times and he thought he was going to die. But he walked out like unscathed. But the whole day he was like, God, not God. The whole day he was like, I am so scared to die. That's like the dominant question in his mind. And he shared that story with me. I didn't even really know him, but he was just traumatized. And I know, oh, well, here's the door, wide open. Hello, right? And so I'm not going to ontological argument him. We're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about eternal security. We're going to talk about how life doesn't end when you get messed up in a car accident. So when we approach people in our apologetics, what is the source of truth that resonates with them? What do they highly value? What are the questions that they're asking? And also knowing that however they're looking for truth, if at all they are looking for truth in any avenue, that God, he's true there too. Isn't that awesome? That God is true in however, if they really walk down far enough and wherever they're looking for truth, they can find God. So I don't have to tear them away from their search in their search in their way. I can say, yeah, let's go down this road and you'll find God there.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.